Hi, welcome to this product school webinar on how to think like a UX researcher, even if you're not one. My name is Kerry, and I'm a UX researcher at Waymo. Waymo is an autonomous driving technology company building the world's most experienced driver. I came to UX research through a somewhat non-traditional path, having been trained in economics and public policy and working for most of my career outside of the tech sector, instead focusing on innovation in the nonprofit and social impact realm. But through these varied experiences, I've seen how a user-centered mindset can be used by researchers and non-researchers alike to design more desirable and impactful services and products. And I'm looking forward to sharing some of what I've learned with you all today. During the webinar, please feel free to chat your questions and comments, and I'll respond as we go along. So when you're done watching the webinar today, I hope that we'll have achieved a few things together. First, I want to expand your thinking as a product manager or other non-research role on the role that UX research can play. Second, I want to prepare you to collaborate more effectively with UX researchers, whether that's within your own company or as external consultants. Collaboration is always easier when we know where folks from another discipline are coming from and how they typically approach their own work. Finally, I want to empower you to apply the ways of thinking and the practices of UX researchers in order to improve your product or service. This short webinar is certainly not a substitute for the input of an experienced UX researcher who has spent years honing their craft. But the reality is that, especially for companies that are just getting started, you may not have a UX research team just yet. And that shouldn't stop you from using what you learned today to better understand and meet the needs of your customers in the meantime. So let's begin. I'm assuming that all of you have an idea of what UX research is, or you wouldn't have clicked on this webinar. But I'm here to say that your idea of UX might be wrong, or more likely incomplete. I find that a lot of folks hear UX and they think only of something digital, like an app or a website. And maybe they envision A/B testing of a finished, polished product. Well, that kind of work is definitely part of UX, but I want to start today by reminding you that UX stands for user experience. And the user's experience of your product or service is way broader than how they engage with a single element of a digital interface. How about what someone sees when they find you in the app or Play Store? That's part of the UX. When they sign up for your service, part of the UX. Using your app, part of the UX. How about interacting with a service even if there's no app or website involved? You got it, that's part of a UX. And so as UX researchers, we're interested in learning about all of it. As a UX researcher at Waymo, I've been really lucky to experience this firsthand. So here in the Phoenix, Arizona area where I live, we operate an autonomous ride-hailing service that's open to the public. That means that our user experience includes a truly end-to-end interaction that includes not only our app, but also the experience inside our fleet of vehicles as a rider or vehicle operator. So that includes everything from the cleanliness of the car, to interacting with in-car screens, to using the child car seat that we have installed in the back row. And that's not to mention the experience of being a pedestrian or a driver out in the world, seeing and interacting with the behavior of autonomous vehicles. Our UX research team has carried out studies on all of these aspects of the user experience and more. Ultimately, everyone has a role to play in the user's experience of your product or service, and not only people with UX officially in their job titles. But this expansive view of UX does mean that UX research can help you answer more questions, and in a lot more ways than you might have thought. So now that I've hopefully convinced you to think about UX research in an expansive way, you shouldn't be surprised when I tell you that it can play a helpful role at every stage of the product lifecycle. UX researchers are dedicated to helping their colleagues build products and services that meet users' needs. And that means we see research opportunities almost everywhere. So don't hesitate to incorporate UX research early and often. Remember when I was telling you that UX is about more than evaluating a new UI? It's also about more than how your user experiences your final production-ready product. But at different stages of the product or feature development cycle, you'll have different questions, and different types of research can help you answer them. At Waymo, our UX research team is deeply integrated with the product team, giving us an opportunity to ensure that we're taking a user-centered approach to product and feature development. And we're designing something completely new. So understanding how people respond to our product every step of the way is really key to our success. Without pretending to be exhaustive by any means, there are a few broad categories and the questions that they may help you answer when it comes to studies. Keep in mind that any of these categories could draw on a range of research methods, surveys, interviews, focus groups, ethnography, and UX researchers will select the type of study and methods that best suit the questions you need to answer. On our team, we have both qualitative and quantitative focused researchers. So since I fall on the qualitative side of things, my examples today are mostly going to be about qualitative studies. But quantitative methods can also be used to answer these same questions, albeit in different ways. The type of studies that I'm going to talk about today include the earliest stage type of research to final testing of your polished product, foundational research, concept testing, experience prototyping, and app usability. Let's begin with foundational research. This lays the groundwork for a new product, feature, or strategy by helping to establish those core needs that your product has to meet in order to be successful. And the interesting thing about this research is that it may not directly involve interacting with your product at all, but it can still be extremely useful in answering questions like, who's my user? What are the underlying needs of my user? What existing habits, mindsets, preferences, lifestyles might we tap into to better meet their needs? And what should our product strategy look like? One example of this in my work recently, pre-COVID, I should say, included immersing myself in the everyday activities of households in Arizona. So I tagged along as they picked up their kids from school, got groceries, dropped off packages, and picked up prescriptions. This is some video from hanging out, watching a parking lot at a shopping center. That was a really important part of the research. I can't tell you exactly what we were trying to learn and why, but I can tell you that we didn't have to ride in a Waymo vehicle or open the Waymo app even once to learn what we needed to. And this foundational research allowed us to uncover important insights about people's lives and habits that we've continued to reference during the design and refinement of potential new features that we're developing. The next type of research I'm going to share is concept testing. And this is when you're a little bit farther down the path, where you have some early concepts or designs, but you need feedback and you want to put them in front of potential users before you go too far down that design, refinement, and development path. So this can help you answer questions like, how do users respond to your early ideas? Do users interpret the concept as you intended? What elements are they drawn to and why? And what changes do users want to see? I'm part of a cross-functional team that's getting ready to launch a new feature soon, and we've worked really hard on it. But earlier in the process, we know spending too much time scoping a feature internally without returning to your potential users can always put you in risky territory. We've all heard about products that flop because they were designed in isolation and based on untested assumptions. But of course, like everyone else, our plans for in-person UX research were affected by COVID-19, right at a critical moment during feature design. As a UX researcher, I knew that we needed to get more user input on the feature before we got too far into building it. So instead of in-person concept testing, we found a way to talk through some early designs remotely over a video conference. Based on input directly from potential writers, the design team and our UX writer were able to rapidly iterate on concepts and word choice. We made some key changes to the app experience and interactions based on this concept testing. And we've since gone back to our findings repeatedly through the whole process. The next example of research is experience prototyping. And this is terrific because it looks at the actual experience of using your product or feature in a natural setting. And it might be a version of your product, not the final thing. So this prototype could be high or low fidelity, depending on the nature of what you're trying to learn. But you'll be able to answer questions like, how do users interact with our solution from end to end? At which points do users have questions? What additional information or support is needed there? And where, if anywhere, is there friction in this experience? How might we alleviate it? Finally, you'll get to a point where you can do app usability research. And of course, this can take different forms, but it typically involves asking your research participants to explore your app and/or use it to accomplish specific tasks. Watching them interact with the app reveals a lot about what's working as designed and what's not. So some of the questions that you might use this kind of research to answer include, do people understand how to use my new product or feature to accomplish a task? Do users engage with the interface as we intended them to? And why or why not? If we're comparing different options, which version is easier to use? And what, if anything, is unclear or inefficient? So now we're actually going to dive in. What does this look like when the rubber hits the road? In just a moment, I'm going to share at a high level the phases that you can expect to see in a UX research project. But before we do that, I want to share something that's even more important than the exact details of how to carry out a research project. So as I mentioned before, the UX research team at Waymo is deeply integrated into our product team. And this allows us to plan for better collaboration and even invite non-research colleagues along for the ride. That means product managers, designers, and engineers sometimes join to observe or support our research. And the most important thing to do to prepare folks to accompany UX research is to go in with the appropriate mindsets. So these include empathy, curiosity, humility, and inspiration. I'm going to ask you all to just keep these in mind as we discuss the phases of the research project, because we'll go into more detail later. Now, remember when I mentioned that collaboration is always easier if we understand where our colleagues are coming from? I'm not necessarily expecting you all to go away understanding how to set up every phase of a research project, but I know that it gets a lot easier to collaborate when we know where we're coming from. So that's exactly why I'm sharing these phases with you. I hope that raising your awareness of these will help you set expectations and appropriately plan for how to incorporate UX research into your product or feature development planning. And it will also allow you to have a highly collaborative role in scoping your research so that it meets your needs. The phases that I'm going to go through are highly general, and of course, not all researchers work the same way. But I hope that they will really help you get an understanding about how UX researchers begin to think about their work. This very important first question is identifying what you want to answer with the research. First and foremost, you have to understand why this research is needed. So what are the motivations? What do you want to learn? What assumptions are you trying to test? What will be changed or decided based on the results of your research? And remember, at this first phase, you're not actually writing the questions that you'll ask participants. You're just making sure that everybody is on the same page about the motivations for the study. Once you know what you'd like to learn, it's time to select the most appropriate type of study and methods to answer those key research questions. What's the best way to answer them with the user profile you've defined? What budget, bandwidth, and time constraints do you need to consider? You might not always be able to carry out the dream research project given some of these constraints. What type of evidence will be convincing to your decision makers? Next, and this one is really, really important, you're going to identify who your target user is or might be. And the reason this is important is because you will need to make deliberate plans for how to ensure a representative group of people participate in your research. That includes folks with a range of different backgrounds and abilities. And this is so important because the strength of your UX research findings is only as good as the quality of your research participants. If you're trying to say something about the range of users that you want to interact with your product or service, but you've tested with a really narrow group, well, those findings aren't very compelling. But if you've really defined your user well and then made sure that you represent all of those profiles in your research, your findings get a lot stronger and more helpful. So you may have an existing user base or a trusted tester group from which to recruit, or you may need to use other channels. Some companies work with recruiters, whether internal or external, and there's even online platforms to help you do this. At Waymo, we use a mix of efforts to make sure that we reach the types of participants we need for our research. Next, yay, this is the moment. You're going to carry out the study. You're going to actually gather that rich data that you need to answer your pressing product questions, and you're going to do it directly from either your users or your future users. Now, you might notice that I have condensed a lot of prep work, planning, study logistics into this one phase. That's just for the sake of time, that I'm not going to dig into all of the complexities of research operations, which are many. But if you want to carry out your own research, don't underestimate all of that important planning that will need to go into making it happen. Now, once you've got all of that great data, it's time to synthesize it. So it's time to sift through it. You're going to recognize patterns and begin to identify your key findings. Remember that UX research is always focused on improving the product or service approach. So it should produce actionable recommendations or considerations to share with the rest of the team. So as you develop these insights and recommendations, you have to also think about your audience. Because the next phase is, once you have all these great findings, you need to share and socialize them to make sure that they have an impact on your product. And this can have a long tail. Depending on the questions that your research set out to answer, you might have different internal audiences in your team or company that are interested in the results. And you'll have to determine what are the different best ways to communicate with them. These are just a few on this slide, but of course, you know your team best. And hopefully, the UX research findings can remain a really compelling reference point, representing the voice of the user as you make future choices in your product or feature development. Now let's return to those mindsets I mentioned before. These look familiar. And now that we've talked about using that expansive definition of user experience, given you a taste for the range of questions that we can answer with UX research, and just now walked through that general research phase process, we're going to really dig into this good stuff. These mindsets are not groundbreaking. In fact, I hope when you saw them before, you thought, well, I'm already bringing those to my everyday work. But they do have really specific implications and are just absolutely essential prerequisites when it comes to UX research. Let's begin with empathy. At its core, empathy is about seeking to accept and understand the feelings and experiences of others. When it comes to UX research, this is always going to be number one. The reason we're doing this research is because we need to step out of ourselves and our own approach to interacting with a product or service in order to focus on what other people see and feel. So this can include addressing explicit assumptions or recognizing implicit ones. Just because something wouldn't be a priority to me personally doesn't mean it's not important to somebody else using the product. So just to give you a few examples, in our research with riders who are visually impaired, for example, we have gathered essential feedback on the importance of features like the ability to honk the car's horn right in the app with the tap of a button to help find the vehicle's exact location. Or, for example, we have our service operating here in Phoenix, Arizona, where much of the year we have triple-digit temperatures, and we are accustomed to moving quickly from air-conditioned car to air-conditioned store. So without really empathizing with that experience, people who live in a temperate climate might not realize that walking 3 minutes to a destination from drop-off is something we might need to alert people to in advance. Empathy also encompasses building a genuine rapport with your research participants. That means really providing a safe, inviting, and above all, empathetic environment during research so that that enables them to truly share their experiences openly, because that's what we need in order to really understand their needs and improve how our products meet them. The next mindset is curiosity. We've come to research with many questions, and we need to make sure that we really keep that open mind full of questions and not answers. Our goal is not to jump to conclusions or offer immediate solutions, but actually to deeply understand the perspective of our users. So we always ask open-ended questions, and we follow them up with the favorite question of all UX researchers: why? Because even when a participant has answered our question, we really want to make sure that we fully understand what they mean and in their own words. For example, recently we're designing a new feature, and we kept getting feedback from our research participants that they wanted to input more details about their trip. They wanted to tell us more through the app. And I'm being a little bit vague because this feature is still confidential. But we could tell from this research that they just really wanted to, input more details. And we could have taken that at face value. We could have walked away and shared a recommendation to our design team that we needed to add some more steps to the user flow and just give them exactly what they had asked for. But instead, during research, we kept that mindset of curiosity. And we followed up when they shared this input by asking them why they wanted to provide more details about their trip. Well, it turns out when we continued talking to them that it wasn't really because they liked the idea of having to enter tons of info into the app. It was because they wanted reassurance and predictability. And taking control by dictating more details was a go-to idea, but it wasn't the only way to meet their needs. Our team instead found an elegant solution that provided that desired reassurance without increasing effort at all from riders. Let's talk humility. We can be wrong about all sorts of things. Doing UX research the right way requires us to humbly acknowledge that our assumptions, whether about a user profile, a new feature, maybe even our product overall, may be wrong. And I'm not going to lie, this can be a tough one, but it's always worth finding out if you've somehow missed the mark so that you can fix it. Even if your launch plan charges ahead, you can use this knowledge to improve on future iterations. So it's really important to make sure that your research participants know that it is okay to give their full perspective, even if it's negative. We always start our interviews by reassuring participants. You're the expert here. We're talking about your experiences and your opinions, and there are no right or wrong answers. Don't hold back. You're not going to make us feel bad. And another trick that I often use to keep that mindset of humility is as simple as saying, listen, we know there are some things about what we're doing and what we're looking at today that probably aren't quite right for you. That humility opens the door for honest feedback right from the start. This last mindset might be a little bit surprising to somebody watching a webinar about research, but it's inspiration. So there can often be a tendency to want UX research to provide the answer. But getting the most out of user experience research involves not only looking for those straightforward analytical patterns and themes. It's also about being attuned to how individual stories and maybe even a one-off statement may inspire unexpected solutions and even drive new research directions. So those human stories, those motivations and needs that they reveal to us during research are often the source for something delightful. Let the stories and perspectives shared with you by your research participants stick with you. Don't forget about the individuals that you meet through research, because it's those individual people who are going to keep inspiring you to be more user-centered and meet their needs by building better products well after the research is done. So let's recap. First, We set the scene by developing that holistic definition of the user experience, or UX. Then, we highlighted that wide range of points in the product development process where research can help shape product and strategy decisions. Finally, we got into the details. We walked through the phases of qualitative UX research at a high level, and we finished with those key mindsets that anyone can employ to think more like a UX researcher and build better products and services. I hope today was useful for you and that it inspires you to listen and to hold on to your users' experiences and what they tell you. Keep that user experience in mind in everything that you do. If you're interested in learning more about what we do at Waymo, check out our website. And I also highly recommend my colleague Maria Moon's recent Product School webinar, Building Trust with Your Users, if you're curious to learn more about Waymo UX. Thanks again for joining me.